Welcome back to Worship in the Trenches. I'm Josh Sahulik. I was in the grocery store last week, and in the checkout line ahead of me was a young dad with his baby daughter strapped to his chest in one of those carriers. And the baby couldn't have been more than 6 months old, I would guess. And while her dad was unloading groceries onto the belt, he kept playing peekaboo with her. Where he would cover his face with his hands and waiting for that perfect moment, then he would reveal himself with a big smile. Every single time the baby would squeal, right? Like it was the first time in history anyone had ever done anything so amazing. Her dad would disappear, she'd wait in anticipation, and then there he was again. And the world was right. And this, as I was watching, it struck me as more than just a psychological exercise. She was learning something deeper. She was learning the certainty of her father's presence, the delight of being seen, and the joy of being seen in return. And as I was working through the scripture readings for this week, I realized that worship works like almost spiritual peekaboo. God reveals himself saying, "Here I am," and then our lives align with his character. And then we get to respond with our own, "Here I am." And it's this beautiful pattern of mutual presence and delight. But where it gets challenging for those of us who are on the front lines of life and ministry, the game breaks down when we separate religious activity from the life God calls us to live. And we show up for the ritual, but we hide from the reality. And we perform the worship while contradicting the character of the God that we claim to worship. So this week's scripture readings trace this pattern from 4 different angles. We'll see God when he reveals his character in Psalm 112. And then this corrects our misaligned worship, which we'll read about in Isaiah 58, and fulfills the pattern perfectly in Jesus in Matthew 5. And finally, empowers our response through the Spirit in 1 Corinthians 2. So if you're planning worship, serving in ministry, or trying to figure out how Sunday morning connects to the rest of your week, this pattern matters because worship is more than just showing up. It's about the mutual presence and delight between God and his people. Psalm 112 opens our eyes to see what God looks like. Listen to these descriptions. He rises as light in darkness. He extends grace and compassion. He gives generously to those in need, and his righteousness endures forever. So this isn't just a character study for theological interest. God invites us into his family resemblance. The righteous person in this psalm mirrors the same qualities, grace, compassion, generous, that's established that is established in trust rather than in fear. Interestingly, the blessed life looks a lot like God's character. So for those of you planning worship, this should shape how we think about what we're doing on Sunday morning. We're not creating an emotional experience. We are revealing God's character so people can see what they're being formed into. The call to worship isn't just come and gather. It's come see who God is so you can learn who you are becoming. For those serving in ministry, you participate in teaching God's character. Every time you gather, you're learning what it means to be gracious when you're tired, compassionate when people are difficult, and generous when you should be self-productive. You are being shaped into family resemblance. So for all of us trying to live as Christians, this is the starting point worship begins with, and that's seeing God clearly. The psalmist paints a picture of God saying, "Here I am. Look at who I am," so you can learn what our "here I am" should look like. You can't mirror what you haven't seen, and you can't embody a character you don't know. That's why revelation comes first. God shows us who he is, gracious, compassionate, just, and generous, and then calls us to reflect the same character in our daily choices, relationships, and the use of our resources. Now we fast forward to the prophet Isaiah because God's people have a problem. They're doing all these religious activities. They fast, they bow their heads, they spread sackcloth and ashes, they seek God daily and appear to delight in knowing his ways. But God remains hidden. Their religious activity produces no sense of his presence. The peekaboo moment never comes. So they're frustrated. Why have we fasted and you see it not? Why have we humbled ourselves and you take no knowledge of it? And God's answer cuts to the heart. Your worship contradicts my character. Listen to what's happening on their fast days. They still oppress their workers. They quarrel and strike with wicked fists. They hide from their own family members in need. And they're bowing down like a reed and spreading out sackcloth while simultaneously exploiting the vulnerable and ignoring the needy. Their religious performance diverges from the gracious, compassionate, generous character God revealed, and they want the peekaboo delight of God's presence while living in ways that contradict who he is. So God prescribes the fast he actually chooses. And he says, loose the chains of injustice. Share your bread with the hungry. Shelter the homeless. Clothe the naked. And stop pointing the finger and speaking wickedness. And here's the promise. When worship aligns with God's character, his nature expressed towards others, then light breaks forth like the dawn. Then healing springs up quickly, and then righteousness goes before you. Then God speaks the word every worshiper longs to hear, Hineni, or here I am. For those of us in the trenches, this should make us uncomfortable. How much of our worship is designed to give us spiritual feelings while leaving our actual lives unchanged? How often do we separate what happens on Sunday from how we treat people Monday through Saturday? The diagnostic is concrete. Are we embodying God's character towards others? Are we gracious to difficult people, compassionate towards those in need, generous with what we have, or are we performing the ritual while contradicting the reality? God says the peekaboo moment arrives when we become present to others, the way He makes Himself present to us. When we loose chains instead of creating them, and when we share bread instead of hoarding it, when we shelter the vulnerable instead of hiding from them. This is not works righteousness, so don't misunderstand me. It's worship alignment. God reveals His character and then says, if you want to experience my presence, reflect my character toward others. Now Jesus stands before His disciples in Matthew 5 and makes a declaration about their identity. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And notice he doesn't say, you should try to become salt or work hard at being light. He says you are these things. Your identity is already established. Now let your light shine through your good works that cause others to glorify your Father in heaven. Then Jesus makes this mission statement. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. The Great Commandment captures what fulfillment means. Love God with everything you have. Love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus embodies this perfectly. He shows us God's here I am in human flesh, and He demonstrates the human here I am in complete obedience. His righteousness exceeds the scribes and Pharisees because it flows from the inside out. They performed the external rituals while their hearts remained unchanged. Jesus lived the reality those rituals pointed towards. They fasted while oppressing workers. Jesus fasted while confronting oppression. They brought offerings while exploiting the poor. Jesus gave Himself as the ultimate offering. He became the perfect peekaboo revelation, God visible to humanity, humanity responsive to God, all in one person. For ministry leaders, this is what we're pointing people toward in worship. Not better religious performance, but Jesus, the one who perfectly aligns divine character with human response. For those serving and participating in worship, Jesus is both the revelation you need to see and the pattern you're being formed into. You're learning to love God completely and love your neighbor as yourself, not through willpower, but through seeing Jesus do it first. The religious leaders separated ritual from righteousness, and Jesus unified them completely. And that unity is what worship should be forming us into. So here's the honest question. How? How do we move from Isaiah's critique to Isaiah's promise? To embody God's character when our natural inclination is towards self-protection, comfort, and maintaining our own flesh. Paul gives us the answer in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. And the answer is the Spirit. Human wisdom produces religious performance. The Spirit produces worship that aligns with God's character. Paul says he came preaching Christ crucified in weakness and trembling, not with persuasive words of human wisdom, but relying on the Spirit's demonstration and power. Why? So that our faith wouldn't rest on human wisdom, but on God's power. The Spirit searches the deep things of God and reveals them to us. He gives us access to what God freely offers. He teaches us to compare spiritual things with spiritual things. Through the Spirit, we receive the mind of Christ, the ability to think God's thoughts, value what He values, and act in ways that reflect His character. This is how the transformation happens. The Spirit bridges the gap between who God is and who we become. He empowers our here we are by continually revealing God's here I am. And this matters for those of us on the front lines of life and ministry because it means you cannot manufacture this through better programs or more authentic worship experiences. You can't try harder and achieve alignment. The Spirit has to do the work. That means when we gather for worship, we're creating space for the Spirit to reveal God's character and empower our response. We're not just going through motions, we're opening ourselves to the power that makes genuine transformation possible. So here's the encouragement. The same Spirit who raises Jesus from the dead dwells in you. And the same power that enables Jesus to perfectly embody God's character is available to form you into that same pattern. So what does this mean for those of us in the trenches? Well, if you're planning worship, ask yourself whether your liturgy creates space for both revelation and response. Are you helping people see God's character clearly? And if you're in ministry, serving, your participation in worship is forming you into God's character. The question is whether you're allowing it to happen beyond the church building. And for all of us trying to live as Christians, look for those peekaboo moments this week. Where does God reveal himself to you? Maybe it's in Scripture during your morning coffee, maybe in creation on your commute, maybe in the face of someone who needs what you have to offer. And where does he invite our response? Maybe through the coworker that everyone avoids, the neighbor who's struggling with groceries, or the family member who needs reconciliation. The injustice that you have the power to address. The game breaks down when we separate religious activity from concrete acts of mercy and justice. And it works when our love for God flows directly into our love for our neighbor. So let me leave you with this question this week. Ask yourself, where am I performing religious activity while contradicting God's character in my actual life? My friend, the pattern is clear. God reveals his character, gracious, compassionate, just, and generous, and he calls us to mirror that character towards others. When we do, we experience the delight of mutual presence, the peekaboo moment when God says, "Here I am," and we get to respond with our own, "Here I am." Jesus showed us the pattern in perfect unity. The Spirit gives us the power to follow. Each time we embody God's character toward others, we experience his delighted response. And the game continues, drawing us deeper into the joy of mutual presence. Thanks for joining me in the trenches. It's my privilege to stand shoulder to shoulder with you.